Jacob had been yearning for a break. After months of work, he packed up his old Jeep with everything he'd need for a week in the wilderness: tent, food, water, books, and solitude. The invitation had come from an old acquaintance, a spiritual retreat of sorts, out in the mountains of Colorado. Jacob wasn't one to believe in energy fields or clairvoyance, but something about this gathering intrigued him, and so, without much hesitation, he took the leap. Before leaving town, he made a call to an old friend, Rachel, a woman he'd known for years. She was 35 now, a few years older than Jacob's 28. Her voice sounded genuinely happy when she picked up. "Come by before you head out," she said warmly. "I'll cook something up for the road." He didn't argue. By late afternoon, he reached her place in suburban Denver. She was just getting off work and insisted he come inside. On the way, they stopped at a market where she grabbed a cart full of snacks, canned food, and a bottle of red wine. At home, her husband Daniel greeted him politely, and their teenage son barely looked up from his phone. They ate, laughed a bit, and chatted until around 10 before Jacob was offered the couch in the spacious living room. He was out like a light in minutes. The next morning, Rachel nudged him awake with coffee in hand. They exchanged a few sleepy words before heading out to the Jeep. Jacob expected the whole family to come along. Instead, it was just Rachel who stepped outside, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. "What about Daniel?" Jacob asked, confused. "He's staying with Josh," she said with a shrug. "He's not into these spiritual things, and honestly, Josh is too young for it all anyway." Jacob looked up at the window and caught Daniel and the boy watching silently. He raised his hand in the half-wave. Neither waved back. They drove for hours, winding through evergreens and dusty trails until they finally reached the open clearing where the retreat was supposed to take place. It was almost 5 in the evening, and to their surprise, the campsite was deserted. "No one's here," Rachel muttered, frowning. "They said by 4 at the latest." Jacob set up the 4-person tent while Rachel unpacked their supplies. She tried to make the best of the situation, sharing stories about the people who were supposed to show. As the sun lowered, they lit a small fire and shared a modest dinner. Boiled potatoes, canned stew, and a salad with cherry tomatoes and spring onions. Jacob ate hungrily, the day's drive catching up to him. Rachel watched him quietly, her eyes lingering in a way he didn't expect. "I love seeing a man enjoy his food," she said softly. "You're not just eating, you're devouring it. It's like watching someone fall in love with life in every bite." He glanced up at her, surprised by the intimacy in her voice. There was a softness in her smile, something wistful and electric all at once. The moment stretched quietly between them. Later, after the fire settled into glowing embers, they walked toward the lake. Rachel, barefoot, stood at the edge of the water, her sundress clinging lightly to her figure as the evening breeze picked up. Jacob couldn't help but look. Her presence was magnetic, an unspoken invitation that sent a pulse through his chest. He quickly turned away, embarrassed by the growing tension he felt within himself. Reaching for his towel, he tried to mask his reaction, but when he glanced back, he saw that Rachel's eyes had followed him. She knew. Her expression was unreadable, calm but curious. She didn't say anything. The kettle on the fire began to whistle. Jacob took it as a cue to return. He poured 2 cups of tea, and Rachel joined him a minute later, settling into her folding chair with silent grace. Her expression was now serene, distant, as though nothing unusual had passed between them. They sipped in silence. The conversation eventually shifted to the purpose of the retreat: energy healing, meditation, shared frequencies, and all the things Jacob usually rolled his eyes at. But something about the way Rachel spoke made him listen differently that night. She was sharp, grounded, yet clearly moved by something deeper. When he felt the tension building inside him again, he leaned forward and admitted, "Rachel, I'm sorry. I'm having a hard time focusing. There's just a lot of energy between us right now." She smirked, that knowing glint returning to her eyes. "That's not the worst thing," she said. Jacob reached into his bag and pulled out a small candle and a metal saucer. Heating the base of the candle, he fixed it in place and began to softly chant a series of mantras he'd learned from an old meditation practice. The flame flickered with the wind, and Rachel tilted her head, amused but attentive. "Interesting method for calming down," she whispered after a while. Her eyes locked on the flame. They sat together for a long time, discussing relationships, desires, emotional honesty. Jacob could feel her resistance melting, not just from the fire, but from the quiet magic of the mountains and the privacy they suddenly shared. Her guard, once so firm, had thinned. There was a weight in the air now, heavy with something unnamed, and beneath it all, something delicate began to stir between them. Rachel had always carried a quiet kind of power. It wasn't loud or boastful. It shimmered beneath her surface, like the lake that now reflected the starlight at their feet. Jacob watched her from the corner of his eye as she leaned back in the fold-out chair, steam rising from her mug, her fingers tracing its rim absent-minded. "I used to think I needed answers," she said at last, her voice low and reflective. "Now I think I just need better questions." Jacob shifted closer to the fire. "What brought you here then?" he asked. "Looking for questions? Or hoping to forget the ones you already had?" She smiled faintly. "Maybe just silence." The fire crackled between them, the flames licking up toward the sky as sparks snapped in the air. Beyond the circle of warmth, the woods stretched out into ink-black silence. Crickets murmured somewhere in the distance. It was as if the world had shrunk to just the two of them, held together by the pull of a quiet evening and something neither dared name. Rachel stood up and walked to the edge of the lake. Moonlight caught in her hair as she crouched and touched the water with the tips of her fingers. "It's not even cold," she said over her shoulder. Jacob watched as she stood and began to peel off her shirt, slow and without hesitation. Her back was to him, her movements natural, almost casual. Then came the jeans, kicked aside with the ease of someone completely comfortable in her skin. She waded in, bare-legged, her silhouette shimmering as she stepped deeper into the lake. "You coming?" she called. Jacob hesitated. The thought of saying no seemed absurd. He stripped down to his boxers and followed her into the water. The lake embraced him with a cool shock, his skin tingling as he moved toward her. They swam slowly, lazily, without a word. Their bodies cut through the water like shadows, meeting and drifting apart again. It wasn't flirtation. It was something more electric and less defined. The silence between them was full, not empty. When they returned to shore, Rachel slipped into a flannel shirt and sat cross-legged near the fire. Jacob wrapped himself in a blanket and joined her, both of them drying slowly in the flickering light. I think we chase all the wrong things sometimes, she said. Security, approval, control. Jacob looked at her carefully. What should we be chasing? She thought for a long moment. Freedom, peace, the kind of connection that doesn't require translation. Something in her voice tugged at him, deep and old and unexplainable. Their eyes met again, and this time neither of them looked away. Rachel shifted closer. Her knee brushed his. Her hand found his, and she laced her fingers through his without asking. There was no need. And then, finally, a kiss. Soft, unhurried, full of the silence they had shared all night. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't a demand. It was an answer. They pulled away only slightly, their foreheads resting together, breath tangled in the space between them. Rachel closed her eyes, and for a moment, they simply existed. Later, they talked. About old loves and missed chances. About the lives they'd lived before this moment. Rachel told him more about Daniel. About the years that had stretched between them like cold sheets. About the loneliness of sharing a life with someone who no longer looked up when you entered a room. Jacob didn't judge. He listened. That, it turned out, was all she had needed for a long time. When they finally retreated into the tent, they did so not with urgency, but with a kind of quiet reverence. Rachel curled into Jacob's side, and he wrapped his arm around her. There was no rush to explore anything more. The intimacy was in the nearness, the shared breath, the unspoken welcome in her body next to his. I'm scared, she whispered into the dark. Of what? That I'll want something I'm not supposed to. Jacob pulled her closer. Maybe this is exactly what you're supposed to want. She didn't answer, but she didn't pull away. Sleep came slowly, in layers of breath and heartbeat, skin to skin. In the quiet, they weren't strangers or friends, or even lovers. They were just two people who had finally found the right question, and the courage to feel the answer. Morning came soft and quiet, the way only wilderness mornings do. The tent's fabric glowed with golden light. Birds chirped somewhere above, and the fire outside had long since turned to ash. Jacob stirred slowly. The weight of Rachel's arms still draped across his chest, her breath warm against his shoulder. He didn't want to move. Not yet. She shifted next to him, a sleepy murmur escaping her lips, before her eyes fluttered open. For a second, neither of them said anything. Hey, she whispered. Hey, he said back, his voice husky from sleep. Rachel pulled away slightly, stretching her arms above her head. The blanket slipped, revealing her bare shoulder. She caught him looking and smiled. But there was something behind that smile. A flicker of hesitation. We should probably get up, she said, sitting up and brushing hair out of her face. Probably, Jacob agreed, though neither of them made a move. They eventually dressed in silence, emerging from the tent like dreamers waking up to reality. The campsite looked the same, but something between them had shifted. The ease of last night now danced alongside something more fragile, uncertainty. Jacob busied himself with the fire, boiling water for coffee. Rachel paced slowly around the clearing, hands stuffed in the pockets of her hoodie. I'm not usually like this, she said finally. Jacob looked up. Like what? This spontaneous or reckless, or whatever this is. She gestured vaguely between them. It doesn't feel reckless, he said carefully. It feels real. She didn't respond right away. I don't know if that's better or worse. They drank their coffee beside the fire. Rachel avoided his gaze, staring instead into the trees. Jacob didn't push. He sensed something in her. Some wall rebuilding itself, brick by careful brick. They decided to take a walk. The forest trail looped around the lake, winding through groves of pine and wildflowers. At first, the conversation was light. Funny stories from college, awkward teenage memories. But eventually, the talk turned inward again. My marriage has been dead for years, Rachel said suddenly. But I didn't leave. I kept trying to fix it, like a broken faucet. Just tighten this. Patch that. Seal the leak. Jacob stayed quiet. I think I was afraid of what it meant if I gave up. Afraid of being alone. Of being the villain in someone else's story. They stopped near a fallen tree, sitting down on the mossy trunk. Rachel's shoulders slumped. Last night felt like a betrayal, but also like a rescue. Jacob reached for her hand. Their fingers met. Not in passion this time, but in reassurance. Delicate, intentional. You didn't do anything wrong, he said. You were honest. That's more than most people ever manage. Rachel leaned her head on his shoulder. Maybe, but honesty has consequences too. They stayed there a long time, saying nothing. Back at camp, the day grew warmer. The sunlight broke through the trees in gold shards, and the lake shimmered like glass. Jacob pulled out a deck of cards and challenged her to a game of gin rummy. She smiled again, this time without reservation. Fine, she said, but I'm ruthless. They played 3 rounds. She won 2. By early afternoon, Rachel excused herself to lie down inside the tent. Jacob stayed by the fire, reading and glancing toward the tent every few pages. He didn't want to smother her, but he couldn't ignore the pull he felt. Gentle but persistent. Eventually, he heard the tent zipper. Rachel stepped out barefoot, wearing an oversized tee and cotton shorts, her hair a little messy from sleep. I had a weird dream, she said. Tell me. I was underwater, deep, but it wasn't scary. I could breathe. And then I saw you, swimming beside me. Like we'd been down there for years. Jacob smiled. I like that dream. She sat next to him, curling her legs under her. Yeah, me too. The afternoon passed with lazy conversation and shared silence. A calm settled over the camp, but it was a quiet before something, not after. Jacob could feel it in his bones. As the sun dipped low, they cooked again. Nothing fancy, just canned beans, toast, and dried fruit. It was enough. Rachel was laughing now, her guard cracked open just wide enough for light to shine through. After dinner, they returned to the lake. She didn't undress this time. Neither did he. They just sat on a flat rock near the water, shoulders touching. I don't know what this is, Rachel said quietly. But I like it. I don't want it to break. Jacob turned toward her. It doesn't have to. She nodded slowly, eyes locked on the lake. Then, she turned to him, her face inches away. Their kiss this time was different, hungrier, aching, full of the tension they'd tried to keep at bay. Rachel's hands found the hem of his shirt, lifting it over his head. Jacob's fingers traced the curve of her back, stopping at the edge of her spine. She shivered. They returned to the tent. Their bodies met slowly, no rush, no demands. Just the quiet discovery of skin, of warmth, of breath shared in shadows. Jacob kissed her neck as her hands roamed his chest. Her touch feather-light but electric. She moaned softly as he traced his fingers along the inside of her thigh, her legs parting just slightly in answer. There was nothing crude, nothing forced, just the rhythm of desire shaped by mutual respect and reverence. Afterward, she lay on his chest again, drawing soft circles with her fingers. "I don't want this to be a mistake," she whispered. "It's not," Jacob said firmly. "Whatever it is, it's real." She didn't speak after that, but she didn't move either. Outside, the night hummed with insects and moonlight. Inside, they lay wrapped around each other, not just in lust, but in the dizzy, dangerous possibility of something that neither of them expected. Rachel woke before Jacob this time. The light spilling into the tent had a golden softness, the kind that made everything feel suspended in time. She propped herself up on one elbow, watching him sleep. There was something disarming about the way he looked. Unguarded, peaceful, like he hadn't slept deeply in years and only just remembered how. A part of her wanted to slip out quietly. Another part wanted to stay forever. Instead, she lay back down, staring at the ceiling of nylon and trying to breathe through the noise in her head. It wasn't guilt. Not exactly. It was the weight of 1,000 tiny decisions, all pressing down on her in this fragile moment of stillness. Jacob stirred beside her, turning onto his side. His eyes blinked open, finding hers immediately. "Morning," he said, voice still wrapped in sleep. "Morning." For a second, neither spoke. Then Jacob reached up and gently brushed a thumb across her cheek. "You okay?" She nodded, but it wasn't fully convincing. They got dressed quietly and moved outside. The campsite had become familiar now, like a private little world, tucked away from everything else. Jacob rekindled the fire while Rachel filled the kettle from the lake. Breakfast was simple. Granola, dried fruit, strong instant coffee. They sat close, legs touching, but didn't speak much. Finally, Rachel broke the silence. "Do you think this ends when we leave here?" Jacob took a moment. "I don't want it to." She looked down at her coffee. "It might have to." "You're married," he said, softly. Not as judgment, but as a fact. "But are you still in it?" Rachel gave a bitter smile. "Physically? Sure. Emotionally? I think I left a long time ago." She stood and walked toward the trees. Jacob gave her space, but followed after a few moments. He found her leaning against a pine trunk, arms crossed, looking out over the lake. "I didn't plan for this," she said. "I wasn't looking for someone to pull me out." "I wasn't trying to," he replied. "I just showed up." She turned to him, eyes glossy with something she hadn't said yet. "You did more than that." They stood in silence, the tension not painful now, but full, like air before thunder. That afternoon, they decided to hike farther from camp, bringing water bottles and a small bag of snacks. The trail narrowed and twisted, leading them to a hidden ridge that overlooked a valley bursting with green. They sat side by side on a flat rock, watching the clouds roll over the distant mountains. Rachel rested her head on his shoulder. "I used to dream about disappearing, not dying, just vanishing, changing my name, starting over in some town where nobody knew me. Jacob didn't speak. He just listened. I think I hated myself for staying, she continued, for pretending like that was enough. He turned to her. And now? Rachel looked at him. Now I feel like I'm awake for the first time in years, but I don't know what to do with that. Back at camp, the air had cooled. The sky turned pink, then orange, then a deep indigo. Jacob lit the lantern inside the tent while Rachel knelt near the fire, lighting a tall candle from her bag. She'd brought it without thinking, just tossing it in with her socks and matches. But now she placed it carefully in the center of a flat rock, shielding the flame with her hands. Jacob sat beside her. Ritual? Maybe, she said. Maybe I just needed to watch something stay lit. They didn't speak again for a long time. When they touched that night, it was different. Slower, deeper. Not exploration, not curiosity. This time, it was reverence. Rachel lay beneath him, her fingers tracing lines across his back, her breath catching softly in her throat as his lips moved from her collarbone to her shoulder, then lower. He worshipped her with each motion, never rushed, never rough, just present, just hers. She arched into him as his hands mapped her thighs, her hips, her waist. She whispered his name as he kissed the space just below her ribs, her legs parting instinctively in silent permission. Their bodies moved together like waves, meeting, pulling back, returning again. Everything slow, everything true. After, Rachel lay on her back, eyes fixed on the roof of the tent, her chest rising and falling in slow rhythm. Jacob was beside her, one arm wrapped loosely across her stomach, his fingers splayed like roots, seeking ground. I don't want to hurt anyone, she said softly. I know, he answered, but I'm starting to want something that I can't unknow. Jacob kissed her shoulder. Maybe it's not about hurting or not hurting. Maybe it's about choosing to live. She turned toward him. You make it sound so easy. It's not, but it's worth it. She closed her eyes and pressed her forehead to his chest. There were no answers that night, but there was warmth and breath, and the kind of silence that didn't ask for anything more. Outside, the candle still burned. The next morning felt different. Rachel woke first, her body pressed against Jacob's, but her mind was elsewhere. She stared at the roof of the tent, heart already beating faster than it should. Something about the silence today felt too still, as though it knew it couldn't last. She slipped outside quietly. The sun had barely crested the trees. A light mist hung over the lake, swirling in pale ribbons across the surface. Rachel sat by the fire pit, hugging her knees. Her phone, long buried in the bottom of her bag, now lay beside her, screen dark. She hadn't turned it on since they arrived. After a long moment, she powered it up. Missed calls, texts, one voicemail from Daniel, 3 from her sister, 1 from work. Nothing urgent, nothing explosive. Just the dull reality of a life she'd momentarily abandoned. The voicemail from Daniel was short. Hey, just checking in. Josh has a dentist appointment tomorrow. Let me know when you're heading back. Rachel closed her eyes. Jacob emerged from the tent, hair tousled, eyes still heavy with sleep. He smiled when he saw her, but the smile faded quickly when he saw the phone in her hand. "You okay?" he asked. She didn't answer at first. "I forgot the world didn't stop while we were here," she said eventually. He sat beside her. "We knew this part was coming." "I know." They stared at the lake, side by side, their shoulders barely touching. "I'm scared," she admitted, "of going back." She nodded. "Of going back and pretending this never happened. Of waking up one day and realizing I dreamed the whole thing." Jacob looked at her, really looked. What if it doesn't have to be a dream? Rachel gave a sad smile. "You don't understand. I have a son, a mortgage, people who expect me to be consistent." "What about what you expect from yourself?" She hesitated. "I haven't thought about that in years." The weight of her life pressed inward like a tightening belt. She didn't regret what had happened, but she also didn't know how to carry it back into the world she'd come from. Jacob stood and offered her his hand. "Let's walk." They circled the lake slowly, stopping at a narrow wooden bridge that crossed a stream. Rachel paused and leaned against the railing. "When I was a teenager," she said, "I used to sit outside for hours. I'd close my eyes and imagine what my life would be like at 35. I thought I'd be in love every day. I thought I'd feel alive." She laughed bitterly. "Turns out you can build a beautiful cage and not realize you're locked inside until someone shakes the bars." Jacob didn't speak. He just reached for her hand again. She gripped it tightly, the tremble in her fingers betraying what she wouldn't say aloud. They returned to camp and sat beside the dwindling fire. Rachel placed her phone back into her bag, but it no longer felt out of sight. The world was calling, and it was getting louder. Jacob cooked lunch while she lay on a blanket near the lake. The breeze played with the hem of her shirt. She closed her eyes, letting the sun warm her face. But the warmth didn't sink as deeply today. After they ate, Jacob sat beside her again, cross-legged. "I know I'm not your answer," he said. "I'm just here." "But I meant every word, every touch," Rachel turned her head. "I know, that's why it's so hard." Later that evening, the tension between them gave way to something softer. Resignation, maybe. Not to the end, but to the unknown. They made love again, not with urgency, but with a kind of desperate reverence. Jacob undressed her slowly, kissing each inch of skin as though committing it to memory. Rachel cupped his face between her palms, tears welling in her eyes as she whispered his name like a prayer. Their bodies moved in perfect silence, no words needed. Only breath, only rhythm, only the fierce knowledge that time was slipping fast. Every touch was both a beginning and a farewell. Afterward, they held each other under the thin camping blanket, staring up at the lantern light swaying gently with the breeze. "I don't want to say goodbye," Rachel said, barely audible. "Then don't." "But I have to." Jacob nodded slowly, eyes closing. "Okay." The next morning they began to pack up. Rachel folded clothes in quiet motions. Jacob took down the tent. No one said much. The spell hadn't broken. It had simply reached its final note. As they loaded the jeep, Rachel looked around the campsite once more. It looked so ordinary now. Just trees, just grass, just a lake. But she knew she'd never see it the same way again. They drove back in silence for miles. until they reached the main road where her car had been parked days before. Rachel stepped out and stretched, then turned to him. She smiled. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me I'm still alive." She kissed him slowly, with a weight that told him everything she couldn't say out loud. Then she got in her car and drove away. Rachel drove with the windows down, letting the wind tangle through her hair and drown out her thoughts. The road unfolded beneath her tires, familiar but distant, like a language she once knew and now struggled to speak. By the time she pulled into the driveway, dusk had settled over the neighborhood. The house looked the same. Red brick, white trim, the porch light flickering like it always did when the bulb needed changing. But to Rachel, everything felt smaller, stiller, almost too quiet. She sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. Then she gathered herself and went inside. Daniel was in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher. Josh was upstairs. She could hear the thump of bass through the ceiling. Everything in its place. Except her. Daniel looked up. "Hey, you made good time." Rachel nodded and set her bag down. "Yeah." Roads were clear. He wiped his hands on a towel. "Dinner's in the fridge. I wasn't sure when you'd be back." "Thanks." An awkward pause. "How was it?" he asked. She hesitated. "Peaceful." Daniel gave a half smile, unsure what else to say. He didn't ask more. He never had. Later, alone in the shower, Rachel stood with her hands braced against the tiles, water beating down her back. She tried to wash away the forest, the lake, the taste of Jacob's skin, but it clung to her, in her hair, in her chest. He had made her feel seen again. That night, she lay in bed next to Daniel. He rolled over, already half asleep. Rachel stared at the ceiling. His breathing slowed. Hers didn't. The next day was a blur. Laundry, groceries, emails. At work, the hum of fluorescent lights felt suffocating. Her colleagues greeted her with casual smiles, none of them knowing she had returned with a war going on behind her ribs. That evening, while scrolling her phone in the kitchen, she saw Jacob's name flash across her screen. Her heart jumped. It wasn't a call, just a message. "I hope you're okay." She stared at it for a long time, then locked the phone without replying. The next few days passed like slow rain. Daniel asked her about the retreat once or twice, but seemed satisfied with short answers. Josh remained buried in his headphones and homework. Rachel functioned. She smiled when needed. She cooked, worked, kept the house in order. But inside, she was unraveling thread by thread. She began to take walks in the evening, long ones. Sometimes she'd pass couples holding hands and feel a sharp pang of something nameless. Other times, she'd catch herself replaying Jacob's voice in her mind, something about choosing to live. One Thursday, she walked farther than usual, past the park, past the edge of her neighborhood, until she reached the quiet field by the old water tower. There, she sat on the grass and pulled out her phone. She read Jacob's message again, then finally replied, "I'm not okay, but I think I want to be." His response came almost instantly. "That's enough for now." They didn't text much, just brief check-ins, words that meant more than they said. Sometimes silence, but it was a silence that felt held, not empty. The next week, at the grocery store, Rachel ran into someone unexpected. "Rachel?" She turned and froze. It was Lindsay, a friend from long ago, someone she hadn't seen in years. They hugged, awkward but warm. Catching up turned into coffee, then into lunch the next day. Rachel didn't realize how much she'd missed female company that didn't revolve around small talk or PTA meetings. Lindsay was divorced, bold, freer than Rachel remembered. "You seem different," she said, sipping her iced tea. "Different how?" "Like, awake. I don't know. You were always careful. You're not now." Rachel smiled softly. "Maybe I forgot how to be careful." Later that evening, Lindsay texted her. "If you ever need to talk, I mean really talk, I'm here." Rachel appreciated it. She needed that kind of tether. That night, Daniel suggested they watch a movie. Halfway through, he reached for her hand. She let him take it. His touch was familiar, predictable, but it didn't make her feel anything. When he kissed her cheek, she closed her eyes and thought of Jacob's breath on her collarbone. The guilt came in soft waves, but so did the ache. One weekend morning, while Daniel took Josh to soccer practice, Rachel pulled out her journal, something she hadn't used in months. She wrote for hours. She wrote about the woods, about breath and skin and quiet. She wrote Jacob's name, and she wrote a question at the bottom of the page. "How long can you pretend something didn't happen before it breaks you?" Rachel stood in the kitchen, stirring cream into her coffee, when Daniel entered behind her and kissed her cheek. The gesture felt foreign, or maybe it just felt late. "Want eggs?" he offered. She shook her head, not hungry. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't press. Lately, he had stopped pressing. Somewhere between distant and resigned, Rachel watched him from the corner of her eye. He moved around the kitchen in well-rehearsed motions. They'd been married 12 years, and in many ways, they had become like choreography, predictable, symmetrical, and lacking any real heat. Later, at her desk, Rachel opened her email and scanned through the routine. Client deadlines, school updates, the occasional coupon. Then she saw Jacob's name again. "Are you still writing?" She blinked. Jacob remembered she used to write short stories. Back when she believed her thoughts mattered. Back when she let her voice take up space. She stared at the message, fingers hovering over the keys. Then, "Only in my head, but I miss it." Then put it back on paper. Or on screen, just don't let it die. Rachel smiled despite herself. That evening, she opened her laptop and stared at the blinking cursor for a long time. Then, slowly, words began to appear. Not stories, not yet, but thoughts, truths, pieces of herself she thought she'd locked away. She wrote for nearly 2 hours, forgetting to make dinner. Daniel noticed. "You okay?" he asked, standing in the doorway, arms folded. "Just thinking," she replied. "About?" "Life." He studied her, unsure what to do with that answer. "You've been different since you came back." Rachel didn't reply. "I'm not accusing, just noticing." She nodded slowly. "I know." A pause. "I missed you," he said. She looked up at him, eyes tired but kind. "I missed something too. I'm just not sure if it was you." The words landed like a slow shatter. Daniel didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked away. Over the next few days, Their house became a quiet war zone. Nothing loud. No slammed doors. Just withdrawn glances, polite sentences, and silence that buzzed like a power line. Rachel took more walks. She texted Jacob late at night, always short but charged. I feel like I'm sleepwalking again. Then wake up. How? Start with what you want. I don't even know. Yes, you do. One afternoon, Lindsay invited her out for drinks. They sat at the corner table of a quiet wine bar, the light dim and the music low. Rachel wore a simple black blouse and jeans. She didn't plan to dress up, but she had. You okay? Lindsay asked after the second glass. Rachel let out a breath. Not really, but I think that's an improvement. Lindsay gave her a knowing look. Marriage trouble? Rachel nodded. Another woman? Rachel smirked. Close. Lindsay leaned forward, curious now. Wait, you? Rachel didn't answer, but the silence spoke for her. Oh my God, Lindsay whispered. Who is he? Someone I met at a retreat. Of course you did. He's hot, isn't he? Rachel rolled her eyes. That's not the point. But it helps. They both laughed. Then Lindsay reached across the table, taking her hand gently. You deserve to feel alive. Don't forget that. The words hit harder than Rachel expected. That night, she couldn't sleep. Daniel was beside her, breathing deeply. She stared at the ceiling, wide-eyed, heart thudding. Every part of her felt on edge, awake, alert, stretched between worlds. She slipped out of bed, crept down the hallway, and stepped into the darkened kitchen. There, she opened her laptop and wrote, and wrote, and wrote. She poured herself into the keys. Memories of the lake, the scent of pine, the taste of freedom on her skin. She remembered Jacob's breath on her neck, his voice at her ear, the way her body had responded like it had been waiting for years. She didn't describe the acts, only the ache, the craving to be chosen, not out of habit, but desire. She titled the file, Things I Can't Say Out Loud, and saved it. The next day, Rachel found Daniel in the garage, rummaging through boxes. Need help? She asked. He looked up, surprised. Just looking for old tax stuff. A beat of silence passed. I'm not cheating, Rachel said suddenly. Daniel turned fully toward her now. But you want to. She swallowed hard. I don't know what I want. I just know this. She gestured between them. Isn't working. He looked at her for a long time, then nodded. Maybe we fix it. Maybe we let it go. But we don't pretend anymore. It was the most honest thing either of them had said in months. Rachel exhaled. Later that night, she texted Jacob one sentence. Can I see you? The reply came back within seconds. Anywhere, anytime. Rachel parked at the edge of a quiet overlook, just 20 miles outside the city. The sun was dipping behind the hills, painting the sky in blood-orange streaks. She checked her phone again. I'm here. Jacob had texted, minutes ago. Her heart thundered. She stepped out of the car, wrapping her arms around herself, as a breeze lifted the edge of her blouse. Then she saw him, leaning against the railing, hands in the pockets of his dark jacket, eyes fixed on the horizon. When he turned and saw her, he didn't smile. He walked toward her instead, steady, purposeful. They met in the middle. For a moment, neither said anything. Then she reached out and touched his hand. That alone was enough. He pulled her into an embrace that felt like home. They stood there quietly, his chin resting on her hair, her fingers gripping the back of his jacket like a woman who hadn't been held in years. "I missed you," she whispered. "I tried not to miss you," he admitted. "It didn't work." They broke apart, just slightly, enough to look at each other. The silence between them said everything the words could not. They didn't go far, just to a quiet roadside motel, the kind with creaky floors and faded curtains. But in that simple, forgettable room, everything came alive. Rachel lay on the bed as Jacob slowly unbuttoned her blouse, his fingers trembling slightly, like reverence was overtaking confidence. He kissed each inch of skin revealed, whispering her name like an invocation. She guided his hands over her body, breathless not from lust alone, but from the dizzying realization that she still felt, that she could still burn. They moved together as if there had never been a separation. His mouth trailing the curve of her hip, her hands tangled in his hair, the soft sound of skin against skin filling the air like music. And when he entered her, it was slow, deep, deliberate. There was no hunger now, only belonging. She met him, rhythm for rhythm, need for need, until her body arched and tightened and gave way to a quiet cry that she muffled against his shoulder. They lay tangled in sheets, breath slowing, the air between them thick with the weight of the moment. Rachel traced circles on his chest. "This can't be forever." "I know," Jacob said, "but I needed this. I did too." A beat passed. "Do you love me?" she asked. He didn't flinch. "Yes." Her throat tightened. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything right now," he said gently. "Just be here." And so she was. She drove home in the dark. Daniel was asleep. The house was quiet. Rachel stepped out of her shoes and stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the family photos lining the wall. One of them, taken 6 years ago, showed her and Daniel on the beach, arms around each other, smiles easy and genuine. She touched the glass. What happened to that woman? Was she buried? Or had she simply evolved? The next morning she moved through the kitchen like a ghost. Josh came downstairs, earbuds in, barely looking at her. Daniel followed, coffee mug in hand, eyes red from sleep. "Everything okay?" he asked. Rachel nodded, "Just tired." They sat at the table like a family, but something had shifted. She could feel it. Maybe he could too. By noon, Rachel couldn't stand it anymore. She stepped outside, phone in hand, and called Lindsay. "Lunch?" she asked. "Of course." They met at a little bistro downtown. Rachel picked at a salad. Lindsay watched her carefully. "You saw him," Lindsay said. Not a question. Rachel nodded. "And?" "I don't know," Rachel whispered. "It was beautiful and terrifying." Lindsay leaned in. "You don't have to choose today, but you do have to stop hiding from the choice." That night, Rachel finally told Daniel the truth. Not all of it, but enough. They sat on opposite sides of the couch. The TV was off. The silence was loud. "I met someone," she said. Daniel didn't speak. "I didn't plan to. I didn't go looking for it, but it happened." Still, he said nothing. I care about him, but I haven't stopped caring about you either. I just don't know if caring is enough anymore. Daniel stood and walked into the kitchen. She followed. I didn't want to hurt you, she said. He turned, and for the first time in years, his voice cracked. You already did. She swallowed hard. Do you want me to leave? I don't know what I want right now, except honesty. We haven't had that in a long time. They stood in silence. Rachel finally nodded. Then let's start there. Later that night, she lay awake in the guest room, heart racing. She had taken a step, a real one. There would be consequences. Maybe pain, maybe clarity, maybe both. Her phone lit up. Jacob, still with me? She stared at the screen, then typed back, I'm not anywhere right now, but I'm not pretending anymore. Jacob, that's enough for me. Rachel had always believed that choices revealed themselves slowly, like tide, like seasons. But lately, everything had begun to accelerate. It had been 4 days since she confessed the truth to Daniel. The house was quiet, civil, unsettled. They moved around each other like ghosts in a familiar space, careful not to bump into memories. Josh noticed he wasn't a child anymore. 18 now, sharp, watchful. You and Dad okay? He asked one night, his voice low as they loaded the dishwasher together. Rachel hesitated. We're figuring things out. Josh gave her a strange look. It's weird, but you seem more you lately. I don't know how else to say it. She blinked back, surprise. Thank you. That night, she sat in the guest room with the lights off, staring at her journal. Pages were filled now. Not with stories, with truths. Some raw, some beautiful, some unbearable. The question still stared up from one page. How long can you pretend something didn't happen before it breaks you? She knew the answer now. Not long. The next morning, Daniel asked if she wanted to talk. They sat in the kitchen again, just like the day she returned. But this time the air felt heavier. I've been thinking, he said, stirring his coffee slowly. Maybe we try a separation, just for a while. See what comes to the surface. Rachel nodded. I think that's the right thing. He looked relieved, but also defeated. Do you want to stay here? He asked. No, I think I need some space. Really need it. And just like that, the shape of her life began to shift. She packed 2 bags. Clothes, books, laptop, journal. Before she left, she walked into Josh's room and sat on the edge of his bed. He pulled off his headphones. You okay, Mom? She smiled, brushing his hair gently. Yeah, but I'm going to be staying with a friend for a bit. Just some space, nothing dramatic. Josh studied her face. It's him, isn't it? Rachel froze. I saw you texting, he said simply. You looked happy. Happier than you do here. She lowered her head. It's complicated. I'm not judging, he said. I just want you to be honest with yourself and with me. Her throat tightened. Thank you. Then she left. She didn't go to Jacob's that night. She needed one more evening alone. She rented a small Airbnb just outside town. A converted art studio with warm light, wood floors, and a garden filled with lavender. She spent hours on the porch, wrapped in a blanket, watching moths flicker around the light bulb. Jacob texted once. "Whenever you're ready, I'm here." She didn't reply. Not yet. The next day, she drove to the trailhead where it had all begun. The road twisted up through the pines. Wind bent the tops of the trees, the same way it had during that strange, magical weekend. She walked the path slowly, gravel crunching under her boots. Her breath steamed in the air. Everything smelled of pine and memory. When she reached the lake, she stopped and stood still. It looked smaller now, or maybe she had grown. She closed her eyes and whispered something to the wind. Not a wish, not a goodbye, just a moment of stillness. Then she turned and walked back down. That night, she met Jacob at the same overlook. This time, he smiled when he saw her. She stepped into his arms without hesitation. "I didn't know if you'd come," he said quietly. "I had to know who I was before I knew where I belonged." They stood in silence, holding each other. Later, in his apartment, they moved together with both urgency and reverence. There was no question this time, no pause. Only permission. Rachel kissed him with hunger and clarity, her hands pulling him down onto the bed as their bodies rediscovered each other completely. She pressed her lips to his neck, his collarbone, his chest, memorizing him all over again. Jacob met her with equal fire, his touch slow and deliberate, mapping every curve, every scar, every breath. When he entered her, it was with full knowledge of the past, of the cost, of the choice made in full light. And when they moved together, it wasn't escape. It was arrival. Afterward, they lay in the quiet. Jacob ran a hand through her hair. Rachel rested her head on his chest. "I told Daniel," she whispered. Jacob didn't react, just held her tighter. "I'm not yours," she said, "but I'm not his either, not anymore." "You're your own," Jacob said. "Yes." She sat up, pulling the blanket with her. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "I don't want to rush into something new just because I ended something old." Jacob nodded. "Then don't. I'll still be here." Rachel leaned down and kissed him softly. "Maybe we just see where this goes." "I can live with that," he whispered, and for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of not knowing. Weeks passed. Life didn't collapse. It simply shifted. Rachel rented a small apartment near the river. 2 rooms, wide windows, and an old wooden table that creaked when she wrote. She brought only what she needed: books, her laptop, her journal, and enough quiet to think. She didn't rush to define anything with Jacob. They met often. Dinners, walks, long conversations under his porch light. Some nights she stayed over. Others, she went home alone. The air between them was warm, careful, real. Daniel and she agreed on a separation with grace. It wasn't bitter, just tired, honest. They told Josh together. He took it quietly, more grown than either of them expected. He asked hard questions. Rachel answered every one. "I don't hate you," he told her. She cried for an hour after that. One afternoon, Lindsay visited her new place, barefoot, a bottle of red wine in hand. "You did it," she said, walking in like she owned the space. "You burned it down and built something new." "I'm still building," Rachel replied. You look lighter, not lost. Just lighter. They drank wine, made pasta, and sat on the floor, laughing about everything and nothing. For the first time in ages, Rachel let herself feel joy without guilt. One evening, as golden dusk fell over the city, Jacob brought over takeout. They sat by the open window, feet tangled, breeze slipping in. Can I ask something? He said. Anything. Do you regret it? All of it? Rachel looked at him for a long moment. No. But I miss the simplicity of not knowing what I wanted. It was easier, being numb, but I'll never go back there. Jacob reached across the table, taking her hand. She squeezed his fingers, grounding herself in the moment, not as a fantasy, but as a choice. I'm proud of you, he said. Rachel smiled. I'm starting to be proud of me too. They didn't kiss that night. They didn't need to. Weeks turned into 2 months. One cold Saturday morning, Rachel received a message from Daniel. Josh wants us both at his art show next week. Will you come? She replied immediately. Of course. The night of the show, she stood by the gallery entrance in a grey coat, her hair pulled back, a simple silver necklace Jacob had once found at a roadside market around her neck. Daniel arrived a few minutes later. He looked better, more rested. You look good, he said with a small smile. So do you. They didn't say much more, but when Josh unveiled his work, a bold, abstract piece titled Split in Stillness, they stood side by side, proud, moved, whole in a way they hadn't been together, but finally were apart. Later, as Rachel walked alone along the river on her way home, her phone buzzed. Jacob. Thinking about you. She paused, looking out at the water, lights glinting off its surface. I'm thinking about me too, she typed, then added, and that's a good thing. She didn't rush home. She let herself wander. She passed the old bookstore she used to avoid, afraid of how long she'd stay inside. Now she stepped in without hesitation, tracing her fingers along the spines like she'd come home. She bought a notebook with a leather cover and a pen that felt heavy and sure. Back in her apartment, she poured a cup of tea, lit a small candle, and sat at her writing desk. She opened the notebook. No title, no pressure, just blank pages and the promise of something new. She began to write. Not about Jacob, not about Daniel, not even about the lake. She wrote about a woman who stood still long enough to feel her own heartbeat again. About someone who let herself fall apart and didn't apologize when she put the pieces back differently. She didn't need a man to complete her. She needed herself to show up first. And this time she had.